So welcome back to my channel. I am Jason and this is from Sin's Perspective Reviews. So moving forward with my idea to recap some of the other shows that I enjoy. Another show I enjoy is Lark Rise to Candleford. Now, it ran between 2008 and 2011 and it takes place around the end of the 19th century. So it follows a young girl, Laura Timmins, and she's actually narrating their story. So she's actually telling her story, basically her coming of age story. And of course it involves a lot of different people, which, you know, there are going to be a lot of reoccurring characters because it is an ensemble cast. And then of course there are going to be some people who kind of come and go throughout the show. And so this first episode, Laura's mom just gave birth, and of course it's this big celebration. Laura's from Lark Rise. It's a tiny hamlet. You know, it's a tight-knit community. They all look out for each other, and you know they have their highs and their lows, and you know their ups and their downs, but they're always kind of there to support each other. And so it's a big party. Everybody's excited, you know, because, you know, you have to also take into account that at this time, I'm assuming the infant mortality rate was relatively high. And, you know, this is not suburban, you know, this is not like London or, you know, a big city where they have access to, you know, hospitals and doctors and that kind of thing. And so they do rely a lot on each other. And so it was a big deal for her to have, you know, be able to, you know, have this child and the child be healthy, the mom and the child's healthy. And so now they're faced with, okay. And from the looks of it, it looked like they, you know, had already decided this probably before the child was born, because they realized that they were quickly outgrowing their accommodations. You know, they already have 4 children. The baby makes number 5, and then 2 of them. That is a lot of people in a small space. And Laura, it being their oldest, they realized, you know what, it's time for her to kind of spread her wings. Not only is it a good opportunity, it's best for her, but it also allows for more room in the house. So, you know, so Emma Timmins, she gives birth, and then she eventually tells Laura that, you know, she's made arrangements for her to go and live with her cousin Dorcas, who lives in the neighboring town, Candleford. And so initially, Laura kind of saw it as a punishment, and she was like, you know, I'm sorry, you know, I'll help out more. And, you know, it's, you know, she's never been away from home, and she's like, I've never even been in a post office. And the mom, you know, starts talking to her, and she was like, you know, this is a great opportunity for her. And then she tells her the story about how when she was a young girl that, you know, they had some, I guess, well-to-do relatives come in to visit, and it was agreed that Emma would go with them. But then they started telling stories about these huge snakes and all this kind of stuff that kind of put her off. And then it wasn't until later that she realized that it wasn't so much, you know, the stories that they told. She was just afraid of leaving. She was afraid of change. She was afraid of something different. And she doesn't want Laura to make the same mistake she did. And so, you know, it was agreed that, you know, she would go and stay with their cousin. And so, you know, the next day, you know, they're saying their goodbyes. And of course, the whole town is out because it's, you know, it's that kind of, the hamlet. Everybody's out to say goodbye. I'm sorry if you can hear that. I'm not sure what that noise is. But they're all out to say their goodbyes. And, you know, of course, they're like, don't forget where you came from, and, you know, the whole thing. And so the dad, you know, they load her up on the horse and wagon, and they, you know, they get on down the road. And so I wonder if that's somebody's garbage disposal. I have no idea what that is. So they arrive in Candleford, and of course they meet Dorcas, who is Emma's, I'm assuming that's Emma's first cousin, which would make her Laura's second cousin. I'm assuming that's how this whole familial thing is working out. Okay, so excuse me, but they, you know, they arrive, and then of course Dorcas arranged for them to have this, you know, nice lunch. It's more food than probably Laura has seen on her table in one sitting in her entire life. So, you know, they talk for a little while. And then eventually, you know, Robert, her dad, he heads back to Lark Rise. And so of course you can see on her face that she's kind of solemn, like her dad is leaving. She's in this strange place. She don't know these people. And so it's kind of nerve-wracking for her a little bit. But, you know, Dorcas talks to her, and they, you know, she starts explaining some of the forms. But of course, you know, she's running through things, but she doesn't actually expect her to get it right away. She understands it's going to take her some time to acclimate to, you know, what the job entails and her new environment. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot to take in at one time. So she understands that. So while she was talking to her, a telegram came in, and it was for Mrs. Arliss. Okay. So Mrs. Arliss is a character. So Mrs. Arliss is, she's also from Lark Rise. And you don't see, I think it's like further in, I don't know if it's this season or the second season, where you eventually see her husband, but you only see him like maybe a couple of times throughout the entire show. And so he works on a ship. And so I guess he's supposed to send wages home to support his family. And, Mrs. Arliss also has a son. Her eldest is Alfie. And so him and Laura, they all grew up together. Now, they all have other children, but the main, you know, the two children from the two families is going to be Laura and Alfie. So, of course, Alfie is still in Lark Rise. He works out in the field. And it's sad, but it seems like most times has to fill in the gap for where, you know, the dad kind of falls short as far as the wages. And it's like, he's like the man of the house. That's the role that he's been thrust into. And so, they get this telegram. Thomas, who is one of the carriers for the post office, he really doesn't care for going to Lark Rise because, you know, the distance, and, you know, it's always this fight because Lark Rise, at this point, they are feeling like Lark Rise falls outside of the 8-mile radius that the post office serves. And so when they deliver mail and telegrams and those sort of things, they actually charge them an additional fee, which of course they can't pay because, you know, they're poor, they just can't afford it. And so he understands that it's always going to be, you know, this thing when he delivers whatever parcels, telegrams, whatever the case may be. So he never looks forward to going to Lark Rise. So she hands him the telegram, and you can tell by his facial expression, he's like, oh, okay, here we go. So we flash to Lark Rise, and there's this salesman. He's selling this, selling beer. Right, and he's telling them that they can get it on credit, and that there's you know, a monthly fee for this, and, you know, who's ready. But of course, Mrs. Arliss, she decides that she's going to get this beer on credit. Now, keep in mind, Mrs. Arliss doesn't work anywhere, and she is completely dependent on her husband and her son. And you find out that Mrs. Arliss she's extremely irresponsible, and at times, she's very immature for a woman with 5 kids, okay? So she gets this beer on credit knowing damn well she can't afford it, right? So they fled. So, of course, they're going back and forth between Lark Rise and Candleford. So Zilla, who looks to be like, I don't know, close to 70, maybe a little bit older, she's helping Laura drag Laura's trunk upstairs to what's going to now be Laura's room. So Laura, of course, she gets into the room, and obviously it's nicely decorated, and she's never seen a more beautiful room, you know. And so she's like, oh, okay, so who else is staying here? And Zilla has to tell her, like, this is your room. She was like, girl, you're in Candleford now. Like, you're, like, in the big leagues. We don't do that sharing rooms and sharing bed and tend to a bed. We don't do that up here, girl. That's not us. So, you know, keep your country ways there. You're in Candleford, and you need to remember that. That was basically, Zilla is a trip. That was basically her attitude, right? And so she kind of left Laura to take in the room and take in, you know, her surroundings and, I guess, unpack and get comfortable, familiarize herself with the area. So, Sir Timothy Midwinters, he is their squire. Now, his family owns the land, so they're all his tenants. And this is Lark Rise, this is Candleford, and this is any other hamlet or town that's on that land. They're all technically his tenants, and they pay rent to him. He is also judge, jury, and executioner. So whenever there's any legal issues, he presides over it. He makes decisions on what the penalties are going to be. That's just how things were set up. And so him and Dorcas are good friends. They grew up together. So he came by because they were supposed to go on horseback riding, but she had to end up having to tell him that, Laura starts today, and, she thought that it would be better for her to stay to help Laura, get comfortable and familiarize herself with her responsibilities in the house and the town and the whole thing. And so they, she gave him a rain check on going horseback riding. So Thomas arrives at Lark Rise, and he basically tells Caroline, who's Miss Arliss, that you got this telegram for her, and that he needs this, whatever the fee was. And so she ends up going to Mr. Paxton, who owns the tavern, and to borrow the money. But they already know that Caroline is full of shit, and she'll never pay nothing back, right? But she tells him, like, what if it's, from my daughter, she's pregnant, maybe, something from my husband. It could be important. If it wasn't important, then why would they send it? Da, da, da. So he ends up reluctantly giving her the money. And then Thomas ends up having to read the letter because Caroline nor Alfie can read. So he ends up having to read the telegram, and it was basically saying that the daughter was fine, and she gave birth to a healthy baby girl, and mother and daughter were doing great. That was basically just of the telegram. And so she was she asked him, so maybe we should celebrate by having some beer. But he could already smell it on her, and he was like, basically, I think you've had more than enough. And so he said his goodbyes, and he went on back to Candleford. And so later that evening, Emma and Robert, they're talking because, this is her first day away. This is Laura's first day away from home. And they're kind of going back and forth of whether or not they made the right decision. And, eventually they did come to the conclusion that this is what's best for her. They're sad to see her go. They wish she was still there. But this is something that, she needs, and it's going to be better for her in her life in the long run. So, Dorcas ends up going to Sir Timothy and Lady Adelaide's estate so that she can, she had the rain check gave him a rain check on horseback riding. So it's the next day. I don't know the time frame with this. So they are finally going out for their ride, and then she realized that Lady Adelaide is there, and Lady Adelaide decides she's going to go with them. But she never had before, but she was saying how Timothy is telling me that, I need to make an effort because these are her people as well, but she's a Londoner, so she's been having a difficult time adjusting to being in Candleford because she's obviously used to being, her whole family's in London, the shops, the restaurants, the museums. It's, she's used to a certain amount of having a certain type of social life, and she just doesn't have it there. And there's also, you find as time goes on, there is this thing between Dorcas and Sir Timothy. Now, they've never had a romantic relationship, but it's not lost on her that they have feelings for each other. And so that also plays a role in why she is so standoffish, and probably why she decided after all this time that she was going to go out with Dorcas and Sir Timothy. She was like, well, I want to, come out and see what you guys get up to. And Dorcas is basically like, Timothy engages me in the same conversation he had since we were kids. Like, it's nothing all that exciting, right? And so they set out. So Laura shows up to Midwinter's estate because he is responsible for, having her take the oath as far as working in the post office and abiding by the rules and the regulations and the laws therein. And she has to read the oath, and, he has to she has to basically confirm that she understands what's expected of her and sign off on it. And so she goes through that process, and as she's leaving, she could see Lady Adelaide in the next room, and she was crying. And so, of course, she didn't say anything. She just kept on walking. Mr. Paxton, he's now at the post office with the letter, because when Thomas got the letter before, when Thomas brought the telegram for Carolina, and he had to go and get the money. They kind of went back and forth. Not Mr. Paxton and Robert Timmins and Twister was in the tavern, and they're kind of going back and forth about how unfair it is that they get charged, you know, an additional amount, and they don't feel like they are outside of the required miles, and that they're being treated unfairly. So they decide they're going to write a letter to the Postmaster General. And so Mr. Paxton is down there giving Dorcas the letter that he wants to send to the Postmaster General, and he's talking about it's not right and it's not fair that we get to we get charged this amount of money. And then he tells them, like, we only make so much, and you can see in Dorcas' face, she's like, oh boy, that's really not a whole lot. And so he basically wants justice. That's why he's there, right? And so she takes a letter and said that she would forward it on. So now the man is there to collect the debt on the beer. It's time for him to collect the first payment. And so he's looking in the window and knocking on the door, and of course no one is coming to the door. And then you look inside, and she got her and all them kids huddled up in the corner, like trying to keep them quiet so that the man goes away, which happened, and he did. And so he goes over to the tavern, and he tells them that he's looking for Miss Arliss and how she owes this debt, and he's coming to collect, and they just bust out laughing, right? Because they know that she don't ever pay shit. So he's like, you can kiss that. Whatever you gave her, you must well just charge that to the game, because you won't be seeing a dime from her. But after the guy left, you saw Alfie sitting in the corner. So Robert Timmins went over to talk to him, and he was basically telling him that, you know, you can't keep giving your wages to your mother. You know, she's not going to do right. And he was like, well, I can't, you know, say no because she's expected. And he was like, he's basically telling him, you have to stop giving her your wages, and you have to basically take control of the situation and do the responsible thing and pay, you know, to pay the bills and do what needs to be done. And so in the next scene, you see her saying, what do you mean you're not going to give me the money? I'm your mother. You're supposed to give your wages to me. And she's laying it on thick. And Alfie, he didn't last 5 seconds. He's like, and you promise you're going to spend it on, you know, the bills and, you know, the food and all that. And she agreed to do that. And I think deep down he knew she was going to mess the money up, but he gave it to her anyway. So the next scene, we see Dorcas sent Laura into the Pratt's shop. So you got Ruth and Prudence, their sisters. They own the dress shop. You know, they are seamstress by trade. They make everything that, so people, you know, the latest, whatever they consider the latest fashions to be, they are on top of it. They do all the alterations. This, that kind of place. It's made to order, right? So Dorcas sent Laura in there to get some thread or something to that effect. But when she went in, you saw Lady Adelaide's there, and they're showing her the fabrics. Of course, they're excited to have her there. Like, oh my God, Lady Adelaide is in here. So they're trying to really, you know, put on a show for her, and this fabric, and this will look beautiful on you, and this will look beautiful on you. But everything that they show her is pretty much, now you have to remember that she is from London, where you want to talk about like high fashion and couture and that kind of stuff. And so the stuff that they make, even though it's made to measure, it's not really on that level. And so she's kind of like, oh, okay, this is nice. It's nice. She's trying to be nice, but you can tell by her facial expression, she wasn't feeling none of that stuff. None of those patterns and materials, whatever they were showing her, she was not feeling that. So Laura walks in and she asks for the thread. And so Ruth goes over to get the thread, and Ruth, as she was handing the thread to Laura's like, she was like, aren't you the young girl from Lark Rise? She was like, yes, I work at the post office now for Dorcas. And so they made some comment about, you would think that she would do more research before she hires someone or something to that effect. Said something really crazy, right? And Laura was like, I beg your pardon, I can read and I can write, and basically I'm not just some ignorant country bumpkin, and she hired me for a reason, and, you know, and I was, you know, for you to be all high class, it seems like I was raised to have more manners than you. And she turned and walked out, and of course they're standing there like, can you believe her? Now you said some old crazy shit to her, and the fact that she fired back and cracked your face, now you're like, oh my God, can you believe her? I sure could, because I was rooting for you, girl. Like, good for you. They taking crap for them. But anywho, so now we're back at the house, because the post office is also a part of the house. It's also where they live. And so Sir Timothy is there, And so they start talking about the letter that Mr. Paxton brought, and the letter they want to send to the Postmaster General. And Dorcas is like, you know, they both understand. They understand that at this point that Lark Rise is outside of the 8-mile distance, but they don't know how to be diplomatic about that and explain it to Lark Rise, because Lark Rise really feel like they are inside the required area. And so they're trying to decide what the next move is going to be. So later that night, another telegram comes through, and it is a telegram for Queenie, and it's regarding her brother. So Thomas ends up having to go back to Lark Rise, and of course Queenie doesn't have the money, and so she goes to Mr. Paxton. And at this point, Mr. Paxton is like, you know what? I'm sick of this. No, this is not right. This is not fair. Da, 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 da. And so they all start pouring out of the tavern and basically told Thomas, like, you have a telegram for us. Like, they are ready to throw down and get this telegram from Thomas. So Thomas quickly got on his horse and wagon, and he skedaddled on out of town. So the next morning, Laura walks in, and she could see Thomas handing the telegram to Dorcas and explaining the situation, like she didn't have the money. So Laura's like, well, what do you mean? Why didn't he deliver the telegram? But, you know, it's for Queenie. Queenie is like the mother of the Hamlet. So Queenie is married to, she's been with Twister for many years. And so they are the elders in the Hamlet. You know, she is the midwife. She is the person you go to when you're sick. She, you know, knows all these home remedies and plants and herbs and that kind of stuff. And so she is highly regarded in their Hamlet. And so Laura is like, well, I don't understand. This is Queenie. Like, why couldn't you just tell her? And Dorcas explained to her, like, that's not how things work. Things are not that simple. There are rules that we have to follow, and they're in place for a good reason. And so Laura then starts talking about how, you know, I found that this is to be evil, and, you know, I don't understand why you couldn't do this, and Dorcas ended up having to tell her that you are not paid to basically critique the policies that we're all bound to follow, that we've all agreed to follow. You're here, your job, you're here to work. And so basically I suggest you get back to work. And so that was their first kind of falling out over that. And so of course Laura, she went back to work. We flash to freaking Mrs. Arliss, and she's sitting there. So Emma, you can hear Emma outside. I think she's calling from one of her kids. And so she goes over to Carolyn's house, and them kids are sitting there eating. And so Emma looked at the table, and she was like, meat and potatoes. She done went and blew all Alfie's money that she should have been trying to pay on this debt on one meal. And so Emma was like, I cannot believe that you took this money and you spent it on one meal. And she was like, oh, well, he's, going to get paid again. And like, she is just really just extremely irresponsible and childish, right? And so obviously Emma was not happy with her about that. So we flash back to the next day. Dorcas and Sir Timothy, they're going to go out for another ride. Another telegram comes through. It's an update on Queenie's brother. And it's basically saying that, at this point, he had passed away. And so Dorcas felt so bad that, she went in person. She went to Candleford and went to Lark Rise to talk to Queenie and to apologize. And Sir Timothy was there too, but he didn't actually go inside. And as she was leaving, Emma was, she was trying to figure out why they were there, and she explained to Emma why they were there. And so now Emma and Dorcas are now going back and forth, and Emma, was like, it's not fair that it should be up to Candleford whether or not Queenie finds out that her brother is sick and dies, and we don't fall outside the radius, and it's not, it's this whole thing again. Oh man, I just hit my mic. I hope the audio is still good. And so Sir Timothy steps in. He was like, you know what? The best way to settle this is to measure it. And so they agree to measure the distance. So, of course, when he get back, Lady Adelaide is like, you trying to do what now? Are you telling me that we're going to miss one of the, a ball or some kind of party? One of the biggest social gatherings of the season or the year so that you can measure some distance between the two towns. And that's not even your job as the magistrate, or I forget what she called him, squire. And this is a dispute between with the post office. It doesn't really have anything to do with you. And he's saying, well, I understand that, but these are my tenants, and I feel like I owe it to them to, to basically to resolve this conflict before, it escalates. And so a lot of that apart, I do think that he felt like he had to step in, but I also feel like if it was anyone other than Dorcas, he probably would not have bothered. So I do think his feelings for Dorcas also played a role in that. And I think that Lady Adelaide, she felt that way too. Like if this was anybody else, you would not be as involved as you've gotten yourself involved. But that's neither here nor there. This is what he's agreed to do. So it's time to measure the distance. So they have this horse and buggy, and they have this rope, and they are going to walk this distance. And I'm like, oh my God, that's 8 miles. So they walk a good distance, and eventually the two towns meet up. Lark Rise and Candleford eventually meet at some point, and then they continue walking. And so they eventually stop to have lunch. They walked all this time. People need to rest. The horse needs to rest, and they're talking, doing the calculations, trying to see where they are. So Dorcas ended up going to talk to Matthew. Matthew is also the person who runs her forge, but he's also the person keeping count, doing the calculations to keep calculating the distance. And so while everybody was kind of sitting around talking and having lunch, she asked him, okay, so where do you think we are? And he basically told her, like, on this particular route, Candleford, Lark Rise is going to fall outside of the 8-mile restriction. And so she called Laura over, and she whispered something to Laura, and she was like, I want you to go and I want you to tell your dad. So she rolls over to her father, and you could tell that, what she's saying to him, I'm thinking she's telling him that if we continue on basically the same thing, that at this rate, on this route, you're going to fall outside of Candleford. So I'm assuming her loophole around the system is taking a shortcut. And so after taking the shortcut, the town falls within the 8-mile radius. And so now they're able to receive telegrams and packages at no extra charge. And she also agreed to refund them the money that they've already spent because she felt like they were wrongly charged. So of course, this settled this dispute between Lark Rise and Candleford, and they partied and they had a good time, and it was, everybody drank and was merry. And so, but I should say that eventually Lady Adelaide did show up, but she showed up at the picnics part. Lady Adelaide was not walking no 8 miles, so she showed up in a horse, her couture horse and carriage and all the whole thing. Once they sat down for lunch, right? So, so she did show up to show her support, but after all that, they had a good time, and that's pretty much how this episode ended. So, yeah, it's a really good show, a really interesting show. Like I said, it's going to be most of the characters are a part of the regular cast. Like I said, they're going to be people that come and go, and they're going to be like some characters that you will see some characters that you will see come and go. Not just, each episode is going to be a different storyline, but you're also going to see the same characters, but they're going to come in and out at different points throughout the series. So I'm going to end this here, and I will talk to you guys later.